All right, let's talk about something we all think about, your paycheck. Have you ever just looked at it and then maybe at what someone else makes and just wondered why? Why are some jobs paid so much more than others? It feels kind of complicated, right? Well, today we're going to unravel that puzzle. We're going to find the hidden logic behind those numbers. I mean, seriously, think about it. How can a deep-sea welder pull in six figures working just a few months a year, while a librarian, a job that often requires a master's degree, earns a much more modest salary? They're both skilled, they're both valuable professions. So what's going on here? What's the hidden logic that's creating this huge difference? It's pretty wild. But the answer might actually come from an economist who was writing before the American Revolution. Our guide for this journey is none other than Adam Smith, and his deep dive into what he called the whole of the advantages and disadvantages of any given job. So here's Smith's big idea, and it's a real game changer. Your salary isn't just for the work you do. No, it's compensation for everything about the job, the good, the bad, and yeah, the ugly. The market, when it's just left to do its thing, actually tries to make the total package of every job roughly equal. So a lower wage might be balanced out by some awesome perks, while a super high wage is often the market's way of paying you for some serious downsides. Now, Smith broke all of this down into two main parts. First, let's get into the 5 factors that he said are just baked into the work itself. These are the natural circumstances that shape a job's pay before any rules or regulations ever enter the picture. Okay, so Smith identified these 5 core factors. First, how agreeable or disagreeable the work is. Second, what it costs to learn how to do it. Third, how steady the work is. Fourth, the amount of trust the job requires. And finally, and this one's really interesting, the probability that you'll even succeed in the first place. Let's break them down one by one. First up, agreeableness, or maybe disagreeableness. Smith pointed out that a butcher's job, which he called a brutal and an odious business, had to pay more than cleaner jobs just to get people to do it. And that same logic is totally at play today. Jobs that are dirty, dangerous, or maybe just looked down upon need what you could call a wage premium to compensate. Think about a sanitation worker or an oil rig driller. That higher pay is basically the market saying, hey, thanks for doing the job nobody else wants to do. Second, we've got the cost of learning. It just makes sense, right? If a job requires years of really tough and expensive training, the wages have to be high enough to make that investment worth it. Smith was looking at physicians and lawyers. Today, you can see the exact same thing with surgeons who go through more than a decade of incredibly expensive education, or maybe a specialized software engineer who's put in years mastering really complex skills. Smith actually had this amazing analogy for this. He compared a highly educated person to an expensive machine. Think about it. A machine has to produce enough to cover its original price, its upkeep, and still make a profit, right? Well, in the same way, a professional's salary has to repay the whole expense of his education, and then some. Okay, on to our third factor, and you can see how these start to build on each other. It's constancy. Smith saw that a mason, a bricklayer, earned a higher daily wage than a lot of other craftsmen, and he asked why. Well, it's because a mason can't work in bad weather, so his higher pay on the days he is working has to be enough to cover all those days he's forced to be idle. This principle is totally alive and well today for freelancers, consultants, or any kind of seasonal worker whose income is just not predictable. Number 4 is all about trust. Smith argued that we pay people like goldsmiths and jewelers well, not just because they're skilled, but because we're literally handing them precious materials. And this idea applies even more to jobs where we trust people with our money, our reputations, or even our lives. That's a huge reason why an anesthesiologist or a financial advisor gets paid so much. Their salary reflects the immense responsibility they're carrying on their shoulders. And this quote just nails the point. Smith basically reasoned that for society to function, we need the people in these positions of huge trust to have a certain standing. Their high salary isn't just for them, it's for us. It makes sure that the people in these critical roles are folks who have something to lose, which gives us confidence that they'll do the right thing. And the final natural factor is the probability of success. And this one is fascinating. Smith noticed that for every single lawyer who got rich and famous, there were tons more who failed and just gave up. Sound familiar? It's the same deal for today's startup founders, actors, or pro athletes. The profession has to offer this massive, lottery-sized prize just to convince anyone to try at all, especially when the odds are so stacked against them. Smith puts it so bluntly here. He calls the law a lottery. And for any lottery to be attractive, the prizes have to be enormous, right? So, in a way, the gigantic income of that one successful person is the market's way of compensating for all the time, money, and dashed hopes of everyone else who tried and failed. So there you have it. Those are the 5 natural factors. But, Smith's analysis didn't just stop there. He went on to argue that this natural balancing act of wages often gets completely thrown out of whack by human policies and regulations. He called this meddling the policy of Europe. And really, it's just about man-made rules that rig the game. He saw 2 main ways this happens. The first is by artificially limiting the number of people who are even allowed to get into a certain profession. He looked at the guild system that was everywhere in his time, where if you wanted to learn a trade, you had to do a long 7-year apprenticeship. Now, on the surface, that sounds fine. It's all about quality control and good training, right? But Smith, he was skeptical. He thought something else was going on. So, what was the real reason you had to study for 7 years to become, say, a weaver or a hatter? What were these long apprenticeships really for? And there it is. Smith concluded it was a racket, a total racket. By making it so difficult, so long, and so expensive to get into a trade, the guilds, what he called corporations, were creating an artificial shortage of workers. And with fewer workers, guess what? They could demand higher wages and bigger profits from everybody else. It was protectionism, pure and simple.
But policies can also mess with wages in the complete opposite direction. Instead of limiting competition, sometimes they can flood a field with too many people, and that just drives wages down for everybody involved.
Smith's best example for this was the clergy. As you can see, the policy was publicly funded education for their roles. What did that do? It created a huge oversupply of candidates. Suddenly, the church was packed with people willing to work for less, and that had the totally predictable effect of pushing down wages for the entire profession.
Okay, so that was the world of Adam Smith. But why does any of this from 250 years ago matter to us now? Well, because these exact same forces are still shaping our paychecks today. They just wear different clothes.
Think about Smith's lottery idea again. It's the perfect way to understand social media influencers or tech startup founders, isn't it? Millions of people try, but only a tiny, tiny handful get that spectacular wealth. That huge potential payoff is exactly what's needed to convince anyone to even take the risk in the first place. And what about those old guild apprenticeships? Smith saw them as a sneaky way to limit competition. It really makes you think, could some of today's really strict professional licensing laws or the demand for university degrees for jobs that never used to need them, could they be serving a similar purpose? Are they sometimes barriers to entry that just keep wages high for the people already in the club? It's definitely a provocative question. So the next time you look at your paycheck, try to think like Adam Smith. Look beyond just the dollar amount and see the entire picture. The risk, the training, the trust, the unpleasantness, and the stability. And when you do that, you realize the big question might not be, am I paid what I'm worth, but maybe something deeper. Is my pay correctly balancing the total package of my job? Now that is something to chew on.